I'm gone. I'm gone. I'm gone. I'm gone. So gone.
All right, Derek B here, Armament Axes, getting ready to do part 4, the final part of our build series. The last part of the build kit finally came in, which was the Sp3 pistol brace. This was sent to me by 22 Mods. The final part that we're going to be putting on the buffer tube, we're going to put this on actually a little bit later. We'll kind of go over how this is supposed to go on. But everything is here now, and it is time to get started with the build. Okay, one of the first things that I like to put on my stripped lower is the trigger guard. Now, if I were going to use the trigger guard that came with this build kit, there is a very specific way that you should really put this on. This has a little pin on it. There's a spring already in here. This would go towards the front. Let me try that again. This would go towards the front, and this would go in the back. And in the back, there is a pin that you're going to want to put in. Now, this part of your stripped lower, these little elephant ears right here, can be broken. And you have to be very careful when you put in your trigger guard. That is where your bench block comes in handy. You want to make sure that as you're putting that in, that this is supported so that when you take your starting pin punch and your pin punch and you take your hammer and secure the rear part of this trigger guard, that you do not break these little elephant ears. If you did happen to break one, they make an accessory that you can put on here to fix it. I think the non-official term is the trigger guard of shame, but hey, as far as I'm concerned, don't ever let anybody newbie shame you. I never do. I really don't care. But make sure that you have a bench block if you are going to put a normal trigger guard on, and make sure that it is supported. If you do that, then you should have no issues putting this trigger guard on without damaging these little elephant ears right here. Now, what I'm doing, I got a different trigger guard. In sticking with the Punisher theme, I got a custom-made trigger guard that was already Cerakoted gold, and it's got an American flag laser etched on the bottom of this here. And this is going to be secured with these 3 screws, which is going to make it quite a bit easier. So, to put these on, again, I like to use a little blue Loctite. So we're going to put just a little touch, well, that was a little too much, of blue Loctite on these. Okay? Again, do what you want. I would recommend not using red Loctite. It's your build, do what you want, but if you ever did, for whatever reason, need to get this off of here, if you use blue Loctite, you can get it off. If you use red Loctite, you're going to have to take a torch to it and heat it up significantly just to be able to get these out. So again, your build, do what you want. I would recommend using Loctite, just don't use the red stuff, okay? So, on one side, there's only going to be a spot for 1 screw. On this back side here, you have a spot for 2 screws. That would be the side, or this front side would be where that pivot pin on the original trigger guard would go. But all we got to do on these, put a little blue Loctite on here, secure these down. And I like putting this on actually even before I put the trigger in, personally. I just think it actually makes things easier. Kind of one of those things you kind of want to get out of the way. Okay, that guy just doesn't want to cooperate. There we go. All right. Go ahead and tighten these guys down. There is a direction to this. Make sure you do put it on the right way. Don't flip it around, or this front part, if we were to reverse this, it would be hanging in here. You wouldn't even be able to put the magazine in here because this part would be dangling too far over. Make sure you put this on going the right way. Okay. A little bit more blue Loctite. The last of these screws goes in this side right here. All right. Line that up. Secure that guy down. We're going to flip this Allen key over a little bit, get a little bit more torque so we can tighten this up. Don't want to over torque, but we want that snug. There we go. Now our trigger guard is on. Now we can get started putting everything else on. Okay, so the next thing we're going to put on is the mag catch and mag release. Now, is there any special order to putting these together? Yes and no. There are some things that you want to put in a specific order. I always put my trigger in before I put on my safety select, which would include the safety select detent and spring and the pistol grip. You don't have to put these together in the exact order that I'm doing it, but again, just make sure that your trigger goes in before you start putting on your pistol grip or your safety select. Putting in the mag catch is pretty simple and straightforward. You're going to have three basic parts. You got this little guide rod here, you're going to have a spring, and you're going to have this little button that has a screw in it. So, first thing you want to do is take this guy, slide it in, push it all the way through. Now, when that thing pops out, take your spring and put that on top of that little guide rod of that screw. And on your button, there's going to be a textured side and a smooth side. You want your smooth side down and the textured side up. And you want to at least get this started. So if you can get 1 or 2 spins on that, just to get it started, that's the first thing we're going to do. Now, what we want to do is push this through so it comes out the other side. That way, to tighten it the rest of the way, basically, and sometimes it helps if you use like a pin punch to push this all the way through, but you can't do it with your hand. But while you push this all the way through, tighten it down the rest of the way just by spinning this guide rod on the side, and you kind of get a feel for it. This would probably work. I might try and spin that around one more time, but if you look down the mag well, you want to make sure that this little latch right here is sticking out far enough that it will catch your mag, but when you push this out, it's going to be released far enough so that the mag will drop, okay? You want to make sure that moves nice and smooth. Actually, I think that looks pretty good right where it is. I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there. Now, you don't want it so loose that if I push this all the way out, it might spin. So you know what? We are going to spin that around one more time. So when it comes down to that, take a pin punch, okay, and push this guy all the way through. And that will make it a little bit easier maybe to get those last couple. Actually, I think I just took it the wrong way, now that I think about it. The last couple of spins. Now, let's see where we're at now. That's not too bad. Okay. I might spin that guy around one more time. So to get that final spin, so you know this is out far enough, take your pin punch, push that guy all the way through, give it one more revolution, one more turn. That looks about perfect right there. So again, if I depress this button right here all the way, this is not going to fall out of this little section right here, but this is in far enough. This little indentation here on your mag catch will catch your mag, but when you push this button in, it gets released all the way, so the mag will drop. Putting in your mag catch is really simple. Actually, most of your lower parts are going to be pretty easy. The only caveat to that might be the bolt catch. That gets a little bit tricky, but that's how easy it is to put in the mag catch. Piece of cake. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is the trigger, the fun part. Now, pretty much every garden variety lower kit is going to come with a mil-spec trigger. As we mentioned in a previous video, there is nothing wrong with a mil-spec trigger. I will go over how you would install this if you're going to install the mil-spec trigger. I'm not going to install it completely because we are going to install a RA 140 rise armament trigger. Now, if you're new to building, if you wanted to do an upgrade on an existing AR, regardless, drop-in triggers are great. Number one, they are a piece of cake to install. This particular rise armament version, if you look, you can find these on sale. Sometimes if you can find a really good deal, you can find them on sale for $80, $90. Typically, they're going to run right around $100 on the high end, $110, $120, including shipping. But if you can find one of these right around $90 to $100, and you're trying to pick and choose where you want to put your money as far as any additional investments, get a drop-in trigger. I've got CMCs, I've got Timneys, I've got Elfmans. For the money, this is probably one of the nicest drop-in triggers that I have ever tried. Now, if you are going to install your garden variety mil-spec trigger, you got your trigger spring, with the long part of the trigger spring, this elongated part, you want that facing forward, and put my glasses on so I can actually see. You want to put this around this part of your trigger. You're going to take your disconnect spring, and typically one side of the spring or one end of the spring is going to be just a touch larger than the other. You want to take the larger side, and there's a little spot right here, and you want to kind of press it down, and it will kind of stay into place there. Now you're going to take your hammer spring and put that on these pins on your hammer. And this is why I really like drop-in triggers. We'll get into that in just a second. Yeah, drop-in triggers are awesome, and this is why. Okay, there we go. All right. Now, and these would be the pins that you would use to secure this trigger once you got all of this in here. You would drop this part down like that. Okay. You're going to take, don't do that actually. You would take your disconnect, drop it down like so. All right. And then the hammer, then you're going to put the pins in to secure it into place. Now, there we go. No, we don't. You are a pain in the butt. This is why I don't use mil-spec triggers. Okay. I'm going to throw in the towel here pretty soon. At any rate, that's the general principle. All right, well, we are not installing the mil-spec trigger. As a matter of fact, I think I've got basically a whole collection of these now. Now, the wonderful thing about a drop-in trigger is that it is just that, a drop-in trigger. All of your springs are contained within this housing. So what that means to us is to install it, you are literally going to drop it right in. That's it. No messing around with springs, nothing else. You're going to drop it in. Now, on the bottom part of this, there are some set screws down here that this Allen key will fit into. And we may need to make some adjustments on these. It will kind of help keep this guy in place and keep it at the right height. So, again, it is as easy as dropping that down. Now, and I cannot stress this enough, once you get this secured in, do not drop your hammer once this is in here. If you drop your hammer without putting your finger in front of it and it flies forward, it can and will break your upper. Snap this piece right here. And once that's broken, you're done. You're going to have to buy a new, your lower. You're going to have to buy a new stripped lower. Do not pull the trigger while it's, this part of this is exposed and risk breaking this part of your stripped lower. So you'll see there's two little holes right there, and you'll see exactly how this is supposed to line up, which again, this is why I put this in first before I even think about putting my safety select in, okay? So to finish putting your trigger in, okay, you're gonna have two Allen keys because you're gonna need both. Now we gotta take these pins and we'll start this back one here. And we may need a little gentle persuasion. Once we get this started, it's gonna go through pretty easily. You just gotta get it lined up. And again, sometimes with a little gentle persuasion, we're gonna get that pin to go through this hole. Getting the first one in is a little tricky, second one's a piece of cake. Now, the reason for this pin is this is how we're going to secure these screws and hold this guy into place. Now, if you do use a drop-in trigger, once you do go to secure these, definitely put some Loctite on your screws. Cannot stress that enough. It's definitely going to help keep it into place and secure it up just a little bit better. I'm going to tap this guy down just a little bit further there so it's lined up nice and even. There we go. All right. Again, getting the first one in can be kind of a bear. Second one is a touch easier. You just want to make sure we line the holes up here. And again, this is the challenge with Cerakoting. Sometimes it does make things fit a little bit more snug. All right. There we go. Once you get it lined up, it does go in fairly easy. Okay? All right, let me go ahead and... All right, we're going to leave that. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to tap that down just a little bit closer. All right. Try not to booger up your threads right there as you're putting this in place. All right. So, getting your trigger in, just that simple. Again, do not drop this hammer and let this fly forward and strike this part of your stripped upper. Don't do it. You can and will break this. And again, once this is broken, you're done. So all we have left to do is take our blue Loctite here, okay? This is how I do it. You don't have to do it the same way I do as far as putting this Loctite on. You don't need a ton on here. All right, we're just gonna get some on the threads, all right? And put, hopefully without dropping it like I just did, this first side in, okay? And we don't want to tighten it all the way just yet, just get it started. There's a reason why we have two of these Allen keys. So go ahead and secure this down. All right. All right, we're going to take our next one in. Put it on this front side here. also, if you have an existing AR, and I've seen a lot of videos on upgrades that are worth doing and upgrades that just really aren't worth doing. There are technically 3 upgrades that you can do on any existing AR that really make a big difference. Upgrading to a decent drop-in trigger. This one I think is adjustable from 3 to 4 pounds, I believe. It's very easy to do, piece of cake, and it makes a huge difference in shooting. The other 2 things, and I never realized how much of a difference that upgrading these things would make, would be to upgrade your buffer spring and your buffer. It makes it shoot a lot smoother, makes it cycle a lot better. Those 3 things are incredibly simple and easy upgrades to do, and do make a pretty significant difference in how well your firearm is going to shoot. So let's get this last guy in, and then we can go ahead and get this tightened down the rest of the way. But not only are drop-in triggers much easier to install, and a lot of times your higher end open triggers where you install the springs, most of it's already assembled, and it's a lot easier than what I just fumbled around with. Okay, that being said, if you get a really nice drop-in, not only is it going to be a piece of cake to install, but you will be amazed at how much nicer it will shoot. I've had this conversation with a few different people, and they've done this specific upgrade, and they were amazed at how well it changes the shooting experience and how much better it shoots. So once you get all those in, obviously get Allen wrenches on either side, tighten that down the rest of the way. These Allen wrenches are pretty thin. You're gonna know when you're at your max right there. Let's see, getting them lined up. These are really tiny. And then this last one, and that is it. It is just that simple to put in a drop-in trigger. You literally drop it in, put your pins in, tighten down those 2 sets of screws. That's it. Your trigger is installed. So again, we're going to add this to the overall cost of the build, anywhere between 80 and say $110 for this one. You can certainly pay more, for different makes and models of drop-in trigger, but this Rave 140, again, I can't say enough good things about it for the money. For, $80 to $110, you will be absolutely amazed at how well this trigger performs. And there's not a whole lot that can go wrong with these. So that's installing the drop-in trigger 101. Piece of cake. Okay. The last thing that we're going to put on before I have to go out in the garage and freeze my hind end off, that is going to be the Safety Select spring, the detent, which also involves putting on the pistol grip. Okay. Now, you're going to want to get a 3/16 inch Allen wrench like this. I call it the pistol grip tool. You can pick one of these up on Amazon for $5 or $6. I'm not going to add this to the overall cost, but this is one of those things that you will have to pick up if you don't already own one. It just makes putting this pistol grip on so much easier. Go pick one of these up if you're going to put one of these together. So first thing we're going to do is you're going to take your Safety Select, and all right, once we get that first part in, and should slide in like this, okay? And you want to keep it up in the fire position once you slide this guy in, okay? Again, regardless of the order that you do these in, once you put your trigger in, go ahead and put in your Safety Select, and then your spring, your detent, and your pistol grip. Now, this detent has a flat end and it has a pointy end. And if you turn our stripped lower over on this side, there's a hole right here that we're going to put the detent in. You want the pointy end going in first and the flat end to be facing down. Okay? Now there's a spring that goes in here, and the spring, there's a little hole right here inside of your pistol grip. We're going to install this with this spring inside of the pistol grip, making sure that it's lined up with this little hole where the detent is going to go. And then once we're sure that those are lined up correctly, then we're going to go ahead and put this washer on and go ahead and secure our pistol grip. So, making sure that lines up. It's all the way in, which it is. So we're going to slide this back up to the fire position. Okay. And we're going to go ahead. Let's go ahead and get this guy started. Might be a good idea to have a flathead screwdriver laying around, which I neglected to do. All right, I suppose a pinch of Phillips will do. Let's kind of spread this out a little bit. Okay. Now, it's going to be a tight fit, and this is supposed to be a tight fit. Ow. Yeah, try not to pinch yourself if you do that. Okay. So, like I said, this spring is going to go down inside of that hole. Now, once you get it that far, try and make sure that the spring, or definitely make sure, don't try, definitely make sure that that spring is lined up with that hole where the detent is, and then press that the rest of the way on. You do not want to bend that spring up. Okay, once you get it lined up, don't mess it up like I just did. Okay? Now, it's in the fire position. When we hold the trigger, it should fire. If I put it to safe, without messing up this, it should not fire. Go ahead and give that a quick test, making sure that your finger and your hand are in the way of this hammer. Again, I'm going to keep saying this, don't let this hammer drop while this is not completed, okay? So right now, it is not firing. The spring is in the right spot. Detent is in, everything is fine. Now we can go ahead and put this screw on. All right, we're gonna go ahead and slide our washer on here. And this is where this guy definitely comes in handy. So if you put this in here, and it's kind of tough to see, I know you're not gonna be able to see down here, but when you have this right in front of you, it's gonna be pretty obvious. This is also gonna help you guide this screw into the hole down there. There it is. Without this, this is not as simple as this, but once you get this lined up, tighten this guy up. All right. And it's going to take a hot second for it to go all the way down. There we go. Then tighten that the rest of the way down. Don't over torque, but get it snug for sure. And there you go. That is basically it. Again, as soon as you put your trigger in, go ahead and slide your safety select in, okay? Put your spring in, or I'm sorry, put your detent in, pointy end down, flat side up. Put that spring in the hole inside of the pistol grip, guide that in, secure this, that's it. Make sure that when it's on safe, it won't fire. Make sure that when you move it to fire, the hammer goes forward, and that is it. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is the bolt catch, and the rest of this is going to have to be done in the garage, so wish me luck. Okay, the bolt catch. Before I go out in the garage and freeze my hind end off, I want to go over the parts that we're going to be using and how we're going to put this in. This is the one thing that can be a little tricky when it comes to putting your lower together, but honestly, it's not that bad. So you're gonna have your bolt catch, okay? This guy is gonna fit right in here, okay? And before we slide that guy in there, you have a spring. You're gonna have a spring, a little plunger, and then we're gonna have this pin that we're going to use to secure the bolt catch into place. So what you're going to do is, there is a little hole right here, and that's where you're gonna put the spring, okay? And the plunger is gonna go in pointy side down, okay? Just like that. Then we're gonna take the bolt catch, the paddle side up, and kind of slide that, oh so carefully, like that, and it's gonna stay right there. Now, the trick to putting this together, you're going to take something, either a really thin Allen wrench like this, slide that in, and hold that into place. You're gonna slide it down so that it's barely sticking out the other side. Then we're going to use our starter punch to get this in, and as we put this pin in, this will slide out, and once it's in far enough so it's gonna hold this guy into place, you remove that and continue to put it in all the way. Make sure you put something in this side to hold this, because trying to hold this in place, figure out how you're gonna hold this pin in place, and take a hammer and secure this in is gonna be near impossible. So that's kind of the trick to it. It's pretty simple. Also, again, I understand this is a firearm. It's gonna get battle scars. That's supposed to happen. But we just took all the time and trouble to Cerakote this. I'm going to tape this up very heavily. This is kind of that one part that if you're not careful, even if you decided not to Cerakote, it's going to be very easy to ding up the surface of your lower. Also, once you get it in far enough, rather than trying to take a hammer and put it in all the way, you can even just take a pair of vice grips. What I normally do is put tape on the sides of the vice grips and just squeeze, and it'll slide right in. So let's go out into the garage. Gonna freeze, and we'll put this guy in real quick. Okay, we're out in the garage. We're gonna be finishing putting on our bolt catch. This is the part of the build where I am a bit liberal with the tape to protect the surface. If you do manage to mar up the surface of your lower, this is probably gonna be where you're gonna pull it off. Also, this lower tool here, you can pick one of these up. There's a few different online, get a Midway, whatever. These are gonna run you about $15, $20. It kind of fits into the lower, kind of like a magazine, and it helps keep this guy in place while we're working on it. Could you put one of these together without one of these? Yeah, you could, but it's definitely gonna be a little bit more tricky. I would definitely go pick one of these up. This is going to help for this. It's going to help when we put in the buffer tube and the detents back here. So not gonna add that to the overall cost, but those are some of the costs that you are gonna have to be aware of. Now, we've got this guy held in place. Spring is in there, plunger's in there. This is being held into place. This is where our starter pin punch is going to be absolutely crucial. So what we're gonna wanna do is line this guy up. And the reason we tape back here, you could very easily scratch up your back of your lower while you're putting this in if you're not careful. There we go. Now we've got it started. I don't know that we've got it in far enough that we can take the Allen key out of the back end, but we're getting there. And that's why I keep the tape on there. Okay, now we're going to take the starter punch off of here, and once you get it in far enough so that you can take the Allen key out, honestly, it's the best way to do it is to just get a pair of vice grips like this and squeeze it. Now, when you do that, put a bunch of tape over your vice grips, and we're going to heavily tape up the other side here so we don't ding it up. But we're going to need to get this a little bit further with the punch here. You stay put. Emma. I think, anyway. Yeah, okay. It's in far enough so that it is holding our bolt catch into place. Now, what we're going to do, the easiest way to finish this thing off, once you've got it this far, is to clamp down on it with the vice grips. But you, at least I anyway, am very liberal with the tape right here. Again, I know it's a firearm. It's gonna get dinged up here and there, but we may as well try and keep the finish looking as nice as we can for as long as we can. So we're gonna go ahead and put some tape on the vice grip as well. If we come in here, grab one end, grab this end, oh so carefully, making sure that we have this spread apart at the right depth, we should be able to just squeeze this guy right into place. And here's if I can get this damn thing to move. There we go. There we go. Okay. So that pushed it back in almost all the way. From there, we can go ahead and take our normal punch. Tap that in so it's flush. Voila. There we go. And it got dinged up a little bit, and that's going to happen. But all in all, it looks pretty good. And the bolt catch is right where it's supposed to be. It's being held into place, so we are golden. Next thing we're going to do is actually put on the front pin here. I like to do that before I put the buffer tube in, then we'll get into the buffer tube. So the next thing we're going to install is going to be the pivot pin. Pivot pin goes up front, takedown pin goes in the back. We're going to be installing the takedown pin when we put on the buffer tube, the castle nut, and the end plate, which is how the spring of the detent is secured back here, but we're going to put the pivot pin on first. You're going to get 2 identical sets of springs and 2 identical detents. The pins, however, are not identical. The pivot pin's going to be a bit longer, and there's going to be a flat edge on the front. That's how you'll know which one is the pivot pin. Now, they make a tool called a clevis pin, which would make this a lot easier. I don't have a clevis pin, but there is kind of a little trick to it. So, if you can get your spring in here, and get this detent in here, and start this pin in, and if you can just take, try a flathead screwdriver, you can just take your pin to kind of push it the rest of the way, you can just kind of rotate it. So what you want to do is, see if we can, might be easier with a pair of needle nose actually. So let's get this with the needle nose. There we go. Now, if we can take the pin, then you can rotate it and then twist it so that falls into place. That will keep the detent from shooting across the room, allow you to put the pivot pin in so the detent comes out in the groove, keeps it in place. You're all set. Again, you can get what they call a clevis pin to make that a little bit easier, but as long as you can get it started, push it in with the pin and then just rotate it up and slide it in, you're all set. Okay, we are on the home stretch. If I were building this without filming it, I would be doing every bit of this out in the garage with this secured on the bench. But since we are going to be filming this, it's going to be a little tough to see if I don't do it here in the dungeon. Then I'm going to go ahead and try and put most of this together here and then go out to the garage to finish it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put on our buffer tube. We'll be using our castle nut. We're going to have to put on our end plate. And then there's a plunger and a spring that we're going to be installing, which this is what will keep the buffer and the buffer spring into place. And what you want to do first is, before you secure the buffer tube, you want to put the castle nut on first. Now, when you put the castle nut on, you want the side that has these notches cut out in it going towards the back. Okay? So we're going to take the castle nut and screw it all the way back. Now, we're going to take this end plate and put it on. When you put the end plate on, you want to make sure that the side that has this little knob right here, this little knobby thing that's going to fit into this little section right here, is facing the right way. So that when we secure this and when we tighten it down, that's going to fit right into that little indentation. So make sure that you put it on so that is facing towards the back of this here. And there's a little groove or a little knob right here and a little groove in the buffer tube. So when you go to slide this on, it should fit right inside of that groove, like so. Okay. Now, before we put our spring and our plunger in here, we want to go ahead and screw this in and get it started. Maybe. Again, this would be a lot easier if I was out on the bench, but it is what it is. So, you're not going to cooperate, are you? There we go. Nope. There we go. Okay. All right. Now, the trick is, and hopefully you'll be able to see this, there's a hole right here where your spring is going to go in. And then your plunger is going to go in, so this little pointy side is facing up. And the trick is, you want to screw in your buffer tube so it covers up just the very front edge of this plunger and doesn't cover up this pointy end. So we're going to get it close to where this spring is. Okay, maybe about right there. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead, back it off some maybe, so we can get the plunger in, and put this plunger in. And then we screw it in just far enough so it keeps that plunger into place. Okay? And that's almost lined up perfect. That's almost where we're going to want it when we're finished. Now, what we also have to do is put in the spring and the detent for the takedown pin. Okay? To do that, we're going to go ahead, take that plate out, and screw it over just a little bit. So it's going to be going over a little bit further than we actually want it to. So now, there's a little hole right here where your spring is going to go in. But first, we're going to take the detent, and the detent's going to go in first. Okay? And again, just like the pivot pin, there's a little groove in the takedown pin. And we want to make sure that is facing straight back. So when the detent goes in, it's going to be landing right in that groove. Okay? And again, one of the joys of Cerakoting, sometimes you gotta make a little bit of extra room and things are going to fit just a little bit tighter than they normally would. Okay, so when we put the takedown pin in, again, just make sure the groove is facing straight back so that when we put the detent in, it's going to fall into that groove. Very important. So we will take the detent, slide that in first, and then slide the spring on top. Now, the only tricky part about putting this on is we have to slide this plate back. And then we have to push the spring in, slide it back over, move the plate forward so it keeps this spring in place, and then tighten the castle nut up, at least tight enough, and you can get it to this point by hand so that it will keep this spring into place, and so the spring does not get bunged up when you do it. I've done this a few times and I've messed a couple of these springs up, but the last couple times I've done it without issue. I kind of have it down to a science now, or let's hope. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Now the plate is all the way forward. It's orientated the way it needs to be. Now we can take this castle nut with that in place, tighten it up by hand. So the plate is in the right spot. The spring is pushed all the way in. The detent is in the groove of the takedown pin. So that way, when we take the takedown pin all the way out, it's not going to pop out and it's going to stay right in place. Okay? Now, we are going to have to go out to the garage and take a castle nut wrench and tighten this the rest of the way down. And you can stake this. I've done this with staking it, and I've done it without staking it. We'll get into that in just a second. But that's basically how you put on the buffer tube. You put on the end plate, secure it with the castle nut, make sure that the spring and detent are in, and that the takedown pin stays into place. Piece of cake, nothing to it. Okay, now we have got to tighten the castle nut. This is a castle nut wrench. This is also one of those expenses you kind of have to be aware of. This is not optional. You cannot hand tighten this, and you really cannot tighten it effectively anyway with anything other than a castle nut wrench. Now, I got this, I think, off of Midway. It was such a long time ago. I'm not 100% sure, but you can pick one of these up for $25, $35 or so. This one also has some other tools. There's also a barrel nut wrench on this for certain types of barrel nuts. So again, castle nut is a must-have. Castle nut wrench is a must-have, sorry. So what you're gonna do, in my case, is you take this part of the wrench right here, and these three little grooves are going to fit inside of these little notches here. Gotta get this thing lined up just so. All right, let's take it the other way. Let's go a little further here. There we go, okay? And once it's in those grooves, you can take this and tighten this down, and you are gonna wanna crank this one put some weight into it, because you don't want this coming loose. And tighten that up as tight as you can get it. Now, we mentioned a little bit earlier that you can what's called stake this. So there's some little slots that you can tap down to kind of stake this in place, and you can still get this off if you stake it. I'm not going to, just in case I ever do need to get this off. And again, I have staked some before. Actually, most of them I haven't, and I have never had an issue. If you take a good castle nut wrench and crank this down, you should be fine. So that is the end of the buffer tubing. Okay, we are basically at the finish line. The only thing we have left to do is put in the buffer spring, put in the buffer, put on the Sp3 brace, put the upper and the lower together, and then I am going to put some sights and a red dot on, that is. So putting the buffer spring in and the buffer could not be any easier. Basically, you're just going to take the spring and slide it in. Now, there's that little knob there, which is going to make it kind of get a little bunged up. So you just kind of got to guide it in as best you can. Then you're going to take the buffer and you're going to put it inside of the spring. Now, on the side of the buffer, there are some flat edges here. That's what's going to allow the buffer to get past that little knob right there. And this guy just does not want to cooperate, of course. All right, here we go. We're going to depress this down, that little knob. There we go. Had it for a second. I have never had this much problem getting in a buffer tube and a buffer spring. There we go. All right. Now, once you get that all the way in, this little knob right here is going to keep the buffer and the buffer spring where it needs to be. Okay? Now, all we got to do is put this Sp3 brace on. When you put any types of brace on, to put it on for the first time, sometimes you will angle them down like this to get them to slide on. This one, you actually pull all of it straight down, this entire bottom part straight down, which will allow you to slide the brace over top of this back end because it's locking up right here. But if we take this and slide the entire part, there we go. Once you get it to a certain point and you get it past that first knob, now it's going to stay in place. Now it will not make it past that last notch, but it will allow you to move it forward or take it back to the last position right there. Okay? So now we may as well put the upper and the lower together. Okay. If you have Cerakoted this, it's going to fit a little snug for a little while. Not only that, the safety select is going to be a little stiff. The pivot and takedown pins are going to be a little stiff. Those will loosen up and they will function normally after a period of time. But that's just part of dealing with the Cerakote process. This is going to be a little snug for just a little while. Now, slide this guy into place. A little gentle persuasion with the pivot and takedown pins. There we go. And again, those will absolutely loosen up over time. You're not going to have to use a hammer to get them in and out indefinitely. This will be temporary. Okay? But that is it. The Punisher is basically finished with the exception of the sights. Now, again, some of the costs that we've talked about. You are going to obviously need to put some sights on this. you're not going to be able to shoot it, at least not effectively without them. You can find some halfway decent. These are not polymer. These are steel sights. You can find a decent pair for $50 or so. You can spend as much as $100 and beyond just for your backup sights. I also bought a SIG Romeo 5 red dot. I got this on sale for $117. This is something that I am going to add to the final cost because you're going to need sights. You're going to need a red dot, and you're at least going to need some iron sights. So the cost that we're going to add to this, overall part of this up to this point, you are going to need to get some sights. Again, I got these for right around $50. $50 will get you a decent set of backup sights. And again, this is something you can always upgrade later. You're probably going to want to put a halfway decent red dot on this. Again, this is a SIG Romeo 5. This was $117. You can spend $100. You can spend $700,000 on one of these. But this is something you are going to have to plan for when you're putting one of these together. And this is going to be part of the cost because you're going to need some sights on it. So this concludes the build part of the Punisher. Hopefully this was useful to some of you. If it wasn't, I apologize. But the best part is coming up. We're going to be taking this to the range and do the shoot video very soon. So again, thank you so much for watching. We always appreciate it. Peace to all. Stay 2A strong.
I'm gone. I'm gone. I'm gone.